Hello, and welcome to this video on EMC's Cloud Tiering Appliance, or also known as CTA. In this video, we will be discussing how to archive and recall files using CTA. Here is the agenda. We will start off by discussing some requirements for CTA, then we will have an overview on how to archive and recall data. Then we will have a short demo. To run a task in CTA, the source must be a NAS system. For example, EMC Solera, VNX, or NetApp arrays. The target can be a NAS system, private or public cloud, EMC Centera, Windows, or data domain system. CTA archives inactive data to a lower tier storage system. When a file is archived, it leaves behind an 8 kilobyte stub on the source file server. CTA will use a policy with a set of rules to determine which files to archive. For example, archive files that were modified 5 years ago. There will be a scheduler to determine when to archive data. Once files are archived, we will open a stub, which is a file that looks and behaves like the original file. Lastly, we can generate reports on our archived data. Now let's move on to the demo. For our demo, we will be archiving data from one VNX to another VNX. Notice here that there's a lot of files that have not been modified for a long time. We will create a policy to archive files that are more than 10 years old. Let's take a look at a particular file. Note the icon of the file, the last time the file was modified, and the size of the file on the disk. Let's start off by logging into the CTA with the username admin and password rain. We will first need to create a policy to archive our data that is 10 years old. Select the Policies tab at the top and then click Policy. Click Add to create a new policy. In the Policy Wizard, we will select the policy type to be archived, and the policy name will be 10 years and older. Click Next. Click Add to create a new rule. Here we will set a rule for the policy to filter files that have been modified greater than and equal to 10 years. Click to add the expression to the rule. When there is a match for the expression, we want to archive the file. Leave the action field as default and click Next. Next, we're going to add our NAS repository to our rule. If we did not have a repository created, we could have used the Add Repository option. Populate our repository to the right so it is added to the rule and click Save Rule. Click Next and review the summary of the policy. Then click Save Policy. Now that we have a policy created, we want a task or a schedule to be ran to archive our files. Click the Schedule tab and click Add to create a new schedule. Here you can see the different types of tasks that we can create. We will be selecting the Archive task for our demo. Click Next. The primary server type is a VNX. The name of the file server is CTA source. If there is no file server created, we could have chosen the Add Server button at the bottom. For protocol, we are choosing CIFS. Click Browse to add the share of the file server. Select the share and hit OK. To continue, click Next. Here you'll see our policies are already populated. If there's no policy created, we could have clicked on the Add Policy button at the bottom. This screen chooses when to run our task. We can run a task on a time base, or based upon when the source volume starts reaching a threshold, or we can choose to run a simulation on the task. For this step, we will select Simulation. Click on Detailed Simulation and click Next. Review the summary of your task and click Finish. We can now see our task in the schedule list. A task that is running will appear in green font. Click History and History Simulation to get more details about the simulation. Now that we have reviewed details of our simulation, let's go back to the Schedule tab and execute our task. Select our task, go to Action, and Run Now. After you see the task light up green, select the task, go to History to get more details about the task. Here are the results of the task. You can see that there are 481 files archived and 481 files stubbed. Next, let's go back to our file share. You will now see that the files that are archived have an X on the icon. You will also notice the date modified and the size of the file appear to be the same. Let's take a closer look at a file. Upon closer examination of the file, we will notice that the size on the disk is 8 kilobytes. This is the stub left behind on the source file server. Let's verify that we can open an archived file. Great, we have successfully recalled an archived file. Now let's archive some data on our Linux server. For demonstration purposes, I have already created an NFS file system and exported it to this Linux host. I have also configured an NFS repository within CTA. Let's take a look at the files on this NFS file system. We notice that there are a lot of files dating back to 2006. Let's create a policy that will archive data that is more than 5 years old. Also, note the total size of the file system before we archive the data. Let's go back to the CTA and create a policy. Click Policies, then click Policy. We will create a policy named 5 years and older. We will create a rule to archive files that were last modified 5 years and older. Leave the action field as archive. Next, we want to make sure our NFS repository is populated with policy. Change the protocol to NFS and add the repository to the policy. Next, review the summary of your policy and click Save Policy. Now we will create a task to archive our data on our Linux server. We want to make sure that when we select the file server, we change the protocol to NFS and select our NFS share. Next, we will set the task to archive files that are 5 years and older. Set the task to execute now and review the summary of the task. Next, let's see what's going on with our task. Here are the results from our task. Now if we go back to our Linux server, you'll notice that the capacity used on the NFS share has dropped. The files still appear the same before the archive because the files are now stubbed. Now let's take a look at some reports. Click on Archive Files, then Archive File List. Next, expand our CTA source file server and click on our CIFS archive. Click Get List to get a list of archived files. Next, let's generate a report of all our archived jobs. Click Archived Files, then View Reports. Next, click on Create Report and select our CTA source file server. Review the summary and click Finish. Next, click on the report and you'll see the graphs will be generated in the window pane on the right. This concludes the demo for CTA archiving and recalling. For more information, please go to support.emc.com and reference the documents listed here. Thank you.